the scandal of Charlie Chaplin's 16-year-old wife ignited, the moment a studio clerk slid a marriage certificate across the desk. The entire room stopped. One man froze with his pen midair. Another turned too fast and knocked over a stack of reels. Someone else stepped back like he'd touched something illegal. Within 3 seconds, everyone understood exactly what the paper meant. Chaplin hadn't just married young. He'd married a minor while the studio was funding his clean public image. No one spoke, because they all knew why this had to be buried. A revelation like this could wreck the most profitable name in Hollywood overnight. So they locked the file, silenced the witnesses, and rewrote the official timeline. But here's the question they never answered. Who tried to hide it first, Chaplin or the studio? To the public, Charlie Chaplin's new marriage appeared orderly, timed, and perfectly framed. Magazine spreads ran side by side with studio-approved photographs showing Chaplin standing just close enough to appear attentive, but never close enough to prompt questions. Interview clips circulated with the same polished exchanges. Chaplin praising fresh inspiration, his wife offering short, practiced comments about shared interests. The wording never changed. Each outlet used an identical description of their first meeting, down to the same 3 adjectives. Press releases arrived with unusual speed, citing convenient coincidences, a chance encounter, a mutual friend, a quick connection formed during a casual visit to a set. Every reporter noted how composed the couple appeared. Every column highlighted how well-timed the marriage was for Chaplin's upcoming projects. Crowds at premieres reacted in almost the same pattern. Brief applause, a few flashes, then calm dispersal. Newspapers avoided specific dates, relying on phrases like recently or not long ago. Quotes from Chaplin's inner circle matched too precisely across publications, as if pulled from a shared sheet. The story looked clean, consistent, and ready for public approval. Each appearance fit neatly into the wider narrative of a celebrated filmmaker entering a new phase of stability. Small details began to drift once the interviews were compared closely. In one account, Chaplin said he met his future wife during a reshoot. In another, he mentioned a rehearsal weeks earlier. Her age was described differently across publications, in her late teens in one piece, still early in life in another, carefully nonspecific, yet never identical. One reporter listed a studio soundstage as the location of their first conversation, while another quoted Chaplin describing a private office. A congratulatory telegram displayed in a newspaper had 2 different timestamps in 2 separate printing. A friend who claimed to be present at their first introduction was omitted entirely in Chaplin's later retellings. A wedding license photograph released to the press had a faint line near the date, as if it had been adjusted before publication. When referencing the proposal, Chaplin repeated the same sentence in 3 interviews, word for word, including a pause described by 2 reporters in exactly the same way. Individually, none of these details seemed unusual. Together, they formed slight misalignments that didn't interfere with the public story, but didn't quite match it either. A few observers noticed these irregularities, though none raised their concerns publicly. One reporter saved an early draft of the studio press release, circling a note about timeline clarification. A studio assistant replayed one recorded interview after hearing Chaplin pause before confirming when the relationship began. A relative of the bride declined to answer a question about the couple's first meeting, offering only a short nod before changing the subject. A fan studying premiere photographs pointed out that the couple's clothing matched images taken weeks earlier, despite being labeled as recent. A crew member hesitated when asked whether the bride had visited the set often before the wedding, eventually giving a non-committal response. A neighbor recalled seeing late-night visitors at the family home, but avoided giving specific dates. One columnist made a brief mention of compressed timelines, then never returned to the topic. These were small, quiet signals, noticed, filed away, and left untouched, but they indicated that the polished narrative might not align perfectly with the events behind it. As the interviews continued, certain statements began sounding increasingly uniform, as if rehearsed in advance. 2 sources close to Chaplin described the relationship in slightly conflicting terms, one recalling a gradual connection, the other calling it instant. Newspapers repeated the same flattering photograph of the couple so often that other images seemed intentionally withheld. A reporter's harmless question about dates was redirected without explanation. And just as speculation might have started, a new document was produced at an ideal moment, reinforcing the official version once more. The details aligned too cleanly. The first slip appeared in a short, routine newspaper piece summarizing Chaplin's latest interview. In it, Chaplin mentioned meeting his wife early last spring, a clear timestamp embedded in a casual sentence. Yet an earlier profile, published only weeks before, quoted him saying they met in midsummer during pre-production. Both interviews were dated, both recorded, both archived. The contradiction was small but direct. The relationship could not have begun in 2 seasons at once. A columnist reviewing the new article paused when she reached the line. She flipped back to her notes from the previous interview, checking her transcription twice. A radio producer, scanning the article for a segment, underlined the conflicting phrase and circled the older quote beside it. A fan clipping the interview for a scrapbook noticed the mismatch immediately. The two dates didn't align with the premiere schedule she kept track of. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just a timestamp that didn't fit into the polished story that had been repeated for months. And once it appeared, it couldn't be smoothed over simply by ignoring it. When the inconsistency circulated among entertainment desks, reactions were quiet but precise. A reporter stopped mid-question during a phone interview with a studio contact, rereading the line about early last spring. A junior editor, preparing a weekend feature, replayed the older interview twice and listened closely to Chaplin's wording. A publicist paused before responding to a simple inquiry, clearing his throat once before shifting to another topic. A photo archivist zoomed in on the date stamped under a production still, then slowly zoomed back out, checking whether it matched the season Chaplin referenced. A fan transcribing quotes for a newsletter asked for confirmation on the meeting date, then quickly said she didn't need it after a brief silence. An assistant on the publicity team gave an answer unusually fast when asked whether the timeline in the article was correct, then followed it with, "That's the version we're using." Two longtime columnists compared their notes over the phone. Each recalled a different season being mentioned in earlier coverage. A studio coordinator corrected someone about the timeline in a meeting, then retracted the correction almost immediately. The reactions weren't dramatic, just small shifts suggesting the narrative was no longer steady. Within a day, attempts to correct the mismatch began appearing. A revised online version of the new article replaced early last spring with around the middle of the year, without noting the change. A follow-up statement from Chaplin's publicist called the earlier quote a casual remark that referred to project planning, not personal events. A separate entertainment column quietly removed the sentence mentioning the pre-production rehearsal where Chaplin had previously said they met. A studio spokesperson offered a short explanation during a press call, describing the timeline as not central and encouraging outlets to focus on the creative work. Several staff members repeated nearly identical lines when asked, emphasizing that the meeting happened during a busy work period. One publication adjusted its timeline graphic, shifting dates just enough to close the gap between spring and summer. These clarifications were fast, consistent, and neatly aligned, so neatly that the effort itself drew attention. The patch didn't eliminate the crack, it outlined it. After the rushed corrections, the atmosphere around the story changed subtly. A reporter stayed late to check the archived interview. A researcher pulled the public marriage record and compared its dates to production logs. An insider avoided questions about when the couple first visited the studio together. In comment sections, readers pointed out that spring and midsummer couldn't be confused so easily. One radio station replayed Chaplin's earlier interview twice during a weekend recap. A clean narrative developed its first scene. The incident that never appeared in the public record took place on November 8, 1924, at 10:14 a.m., inside a small administrative room on the second floor of Chaplin's studio, La Brea Avenue. Present were Charlie Chaplin, Lita Gray, Chaplin's production manager Henry Bergman, and studio secretary Ruth Ellington. The room was unremarkable, one window half-latched, a metal filing cabinet slightly ajar, a single desk lamp switched on despite the daylight. According to the studio schedule, Chaplin was meant to be on stage reviewing costume tests. Yet he entered the administrative room instead, several minutes before Bergman arrived. Gray followed through the back staircase usually reserved for delivery staff, not talent or guests. Ellington hesitated before closing the door, glancing toward the hallway where no meeting had been listed for that morning. The first signals that something didn't match the official version appeared immediately. Chaplin placed a thin folder on the desk that did not match the day's production paperwork, and Gray sat in the seat farthest from the window, opposite where she typically sat during routine studio matters. Nothing in the public story ever referenced this meeting. Nothing in the production logs mentioned it at all. The reconstructed sequence begins when Bergman stepped inside and pushed the door until it clicked softly behind him. Ellington set her notebook on the desk, then flipped it shut without writing anything. Chaplin tapped the thin folder once, sliding it toward Bergman. Bergman glanced at Gray, then placed his hand on the folder without opening it. Gray checked behind her, confirming the hallway was empty, before placing a small envelope on the corner of the desk. Ellington moved it with 2 fingers to the center, keeping her eyes on the desk surface. Chaplin whispered a sentence too quietly for the portable recorder in the hallway to pick up, prompting Gray to shift in her chair. Bergman opened the folder halfway, closed it again, then reopened it with a slower motion. Ellington stood, crossed to the filing cabinet, and pulled out a drawer only an inch before pushing it back in. Gray rested her hand on a document inside the folder. Bergman gently repositioned it under his own palm. Someone's footsteps passed outside. Chaplin paused mid-sentence until they faded. Ellington walked to the door, checked the hallway, and returned to her seat without speaking. Chaplin removed a single sheet from the folder and placed it face down on the desk. Gray lifted the envelope, checked its seal, and returned it to the table. Bergman locked a small drawer beside him, though nothing had been placed inside. Near the end of the sequence, Chaplin handed Ellington a note. She read it, folded it twice, and slid it into her pocket without acknowledging it verbally. A studio runner appeared briefly at the doorway asking for Chaplin, but Bergman stepped forward, closed the door between them, and said, "He's in a meeting." The runner left without further questioning. These actions formed a chain that never entered the studio's public timeline. The incident shifted at 10:41 a.m. when Bergman opened the folder fully, revealing a draft contract bearing Gray's name with a date that predated her officially documented involvement in the production. The contract included a signature line, initialed in pencil, initials matching those later presented in a separate, finalized document. That initial could not match the public narrative, which claimed no agreement existed before December. Ellington stopped moving entirely, her hand hovering over her pocket. Gray straightened, adjusting her posture as Chaplin angled the contract slightly away from the window. Bergman closed his notebook too quickly, causing a soft thud on the desk. Chaplin cleared his throat once before saying something indistinct. Gray reached for a pen but paused when she noticed the contract's date. Bergman glanced at the clock. Ellington asked whether the door should remain locked. Chaplin gave a short reply and shifted the document toward Gray again. Within seconds, the descriptions of when she joined the project, when discussions first occurred, and how the relationship developed could no longer align with what the public had been told. The meeting ended earlier than scheduled. No one referenced the contract aloud again. Within an hour, the contract draft was replaced with a version carrying a later date. Ellington rewrote the meeting record, omitting the time and participants. A brief message went out to the publicity team instructing them to standardize all references to November appearances. One form from the filing cabinet disappeared from the day's stack. A phone call was placed from Bergman's office containing only one instruction: adjust the timeline. A door on the second floor was locked for the rest of the day. Everything shifted quietly, permanently. The cleanup began within minutes of the November 8 meeting ending. Bergman closed the folder the moment Gray stepped into the hall. Ellington moved the face-down page from the center of the desk to the bottom of a separate stack. A short call went out from the office phone, one sentence, delivered without pauses. The hallway camera's angle was adjusted slightly by a passing technician. A runner who approached the second-floor corridor was redirected to Stage A without explanation. Ellington erased 2 lines from the scheduling board, leaving a faint residue where the meeting title should have been. A message on her desk was torn in half and dropped into the wastebasket. Bergman locked the drawer he had emptied only minutes earlier. A note folded during the meeting was slipped into Chaplin's coat pocket as he walked past. By 10:55 a.m., the room showed no trace that 4 people had been inside for nearly half an hour. The first rewrite began at 11:12 a.m. inside the adjacent administrative office. Ellington opened the day's log and replaced the 10:0011:00 entry with a vague production consultation. She crossed out the original location and rewrote it with fewer words. Bergman compared his notebook with hers, pausing when their timestamps didn't match. He closed his book without reconciling them. A draft memo was typed with a simplified description of the morning. The first version included 4 lines. The second contained only 2. Before sending it, Ellington deleted the attachment and reattached a version with shifted margins. She asked, "What exactly should we include?" without lifting her eyes from the page. 2 statements were prepared side by side, one with names, one without. A printed record was placed into the outgoing file, then immediately replaced with a cleaner copy. The studio calendar was updated so the meeting lasted 7 minutes instead of 27. A request to clarify the production timeline was received, then ignored. A revised edit of the day's schedule circulated at noon, missing the earlier entry entirely. Coordination spread through short, unembellished steps. At 12:18 p.m., Bergman made a brief call stating only, "Use the standard version." 10 minutes later, 2 staff members met quietly near the stairwell. One handed the other a sealed folder without speaking. A document containing morning notes moved 3 departments, each time returning with fewer lines than before. A producer requested an in-person update but received a written summary instead, containing no mention of the contract draft. A correction request passed through the publicity office with no explanation of what was being corrected. A planned meeting in the main conference room was shifted to a smaller office at the far end of the building. An afternoon update was delivered verbally, omitting the time of the November 8 session. Minutes later, 2 conflicting instructions were sent, one asking for a full log, another advising staff to simplify the record. A coordinator who had originally been copied on the day's schedule was removed from the distribution list. A file shared internally lacked the attachments referenced in the body of the email. By late afternoon, most staff were operating with a single version of the morning, one missing key steps. By early evening, the adjustments solidified. A final draft of the day's summary was approved within minutes of submission. A signature from a department head appeared on the document without any discussion recorded. The file containing the revised schedule was moved to a restricted directory. A physical envelope from the meeting was placed in long-term storage with no accompanying note. The second-floor hallway door was locked again before closing time. A message went out to 3 staff members. This should be enough. No additional edits were requested. No further references to the November 8 meeting entered the records. And that version became the record. Staff routes changed without announcement. A production assistant avoided the second-floor corridor used daily. 2 editors lowered their voices when passing one another near the mailroom. A scheduler repeated a set of instructions twice before sending them. A junior clerk stopped mid-sentence and restarted with fewer words when a supervisor entered. Files were held against chests longer before being handed over. Morning meetings started 5 minutes late, then 10. An employee hesitated before entering the administrative office, checking the hallway first. One worker tapped an entry on a ledger, then reviewed the same page again. A conversation about the week's shoot ended abruptly when footsteps approached. A supervisor corrected a minor date on a memo that had been correct the day before. A report was printed, then reprinted with one line altered. Phones were placed face down on desks more frequently. A laptop was closed the moment someone walked past. A delivery left unclaimed at a reception desk remained there 2 hours longer than processes showed misalignment. Forms arrived with blank sections where names normally appeared. Two versions of the same staffing document circulated simultaneously. A file was updated twice within 10 minutes with different timestamp. Meeting notes were shortened dramatically from full paragraphs to single-line summaries. An instruction originally phrased precisely was rewritten using softer language and fewer specifics. A clerk double-checked a signature on a release form before forwarding it. One report returned for revision lacked any explanation. A request meant for accounting was forwarded to wardrobe, then returned to administration. Timestamps on 3 related documents did not match. An appointment, NT scheduled for noon, was changed to afternoon without a new time. A printed policy had a line quietly removed between print runs. A supervisor sent an abrupt message, "Use the simplified version." A production spreadsheet was duplicated under a new file name. An item was marked completed before corresponding tasks appeared finished. A clerk removed an attachment from an email before forwarding it to external press contacts. Behaviors among close collaborators shifted. 2 coworkers avoided eye contact in the corridor. A department head answered questions with shorter replies than usual. A minor disagreement over call sheets was handled quickly and closed. 2 people began speaking at once, then stopped abruptly. An assistant checked behind a door before opening a file drawer. Whispered conversations broke off when someone approached. One employee left for the day earlier than scheduled without logging an explanation. Another stayed late, finishing a single page of notes. A supervisor replaced a staff member on a routine task with someone from another team. A message was deleted from a shared inbox within seconds of arrival. 2 people exchanged different versions of the same meeting detail and did not reconcile them. A staffer rewrote the same line twice in a draft before saving the file. A usually busy hour in the office held unexpected silence for 10 minutes. Outside, small public discrepancy. A journalist called the studio requesting clarification on a timeline. A public statement was revised before release. One sentence removed in the second draft. A line was withdrawn from a press note at the last moment. A spokesperson asked for additional time to prepare a response. 2 different figures appeared in separate reports covering the same event. A public file hosted on the studio site lacked an attachment referenced in the notice. During an interview, a question about dates was deflected with a brief, unrelated answer. The studio website updated a biography overnight with a changed date. A posted fact was altered without an accompanying note. An external inquiry was opened with minimal wording and no follow-up details. A drawer was locked twice before closing. An internal file stayed open on a screen after hours. One name was whispered once, then avoided in conversation. 2 employees paused at the same doorway and stepped aside. A document sat slightly out of alignment on a desk. The cracks had already begun to spread. The first discrepant document is a typewritten contract draft found in the Chaplin Studios administrative drawer, labeled Draft A, 11/08/1924, single-spaced, 3 pages. The top of page 1 lists, Party, Lita Gray, with a date line left blank. Page 2 contains a clause referencing engagement to commence upon approval, followed by a pencil initial on the signature line. CC The pencil initial is light, pressure consistent with a mechanical pencil. A separate, later file labeled Final Contract, 12/15/1924, contains an identical clause. The signature line bears a different mark, inked in fountain pen. Again, CC The 2 signature marks are visually similar in stroke pattern but executed in different media. The Draft A file also contains a faint, handwritten date, 11/08/1924, written in a different hand than the pencil initials. Line by line, Draft A and Final Contract match except for the dates and the medium of the signature. Draft A is stamped into a folder that was not listed on the day's outgoing document log. The outgoing log shows a different document number for the same period. Additional items form a repeating discrepancy. A production ledger shows Stage B bookings with timestamps. An entry on 11/08/1924 records Chaplin scheduled on Stage B at 10:00 a.m. A separate time card for Chaplin's movements, signed by the stage manager, lists him as present in Stage B at 10:05 a.m. The studio receptionist's visitor ledger records a private meeting, second floor, at 10:15 a.m. on the same date. The receptionist's ledger contains the entry in blue ink. The page shows an erased pencil mark beneath it. A telegram sent to the publicity office on 11/09/1924 references upcoming appearance and is timestamped 9:03 a.m. Its body duplicates a sentence found verbatim in the press release later issued on 11/12/1924. The press release archive contains two versions, an earlier draft with 3 paragraphs, and a later release where one paragraph has been removed without annotation. The content removed in the later release contained a specific reference to private consultation on studio matters. A camera log from the second-floor corridor camera shows an entry for 11/08/1924 10:10 a.m. marked "Camera repositioned," with no further note. The correction log for the administrative ledger records 3 edits to the November 8 entry between 11:00 a.m. and 3:00 p.m. on that day. Interviewed staff provide small, corroborating slips. A former secretary, when asked about meeting records, hesitated before supplying a copy of the receptionist ledger and then adjusted a corner of the page while recounting the date. A production assistant checked their notes twice before stating the time Chaplin left stage B, and then referred to an unscheduled second-floor visit while correcting themselves. 2 different clerks independently used the same unusual phrasing, "consultation only, no press," in describing the morning's entry. During a review, a file clerk reached for draft A, paused, and refiled it into a cabinet labeled "restricted," then announced aloud that the file had been misfiled earlier. A former runner asked about whether Chaplin was on set at 10:00 a.m., looked at a small notepad, tapped a line, and then read a different time than originally recorded. An archival technician, while showing the camera log, turned the page to reveal the camera reposition note, and without prompting, mentioned the absence of recorded footage for that hour. 2 independent witnesses described the same brief exchange between Ellington and Bergman in which a sheet was removed from a desk and placed in a coat pocket. Neither witness volunteered this detail until asked about what they saw while filing. The decisive object is a photograph printed on studio paper, 8x10, labeled second floor corridor, 11/08/1924, 10:17 a.m. The photo shows Chaplin standing in the corridor, hat in hand, with a folder partially visible under his arm. Lita Gray appears in the frame, positioned near the stairwell, her coat buttoned. The light on the photograph matches the half-latched window described in the administrative room inventory. On the back of the photograph in pencil, someone has written, "Taken by stagehand 7, camera repositioned, print kept." The contact sheet associated with the roll contains an unprinted frame between 2 exposed frames. The negative corresponding to the printed frame shows a small crease in the emulsion consistent with handling. The photograph exists in the studio's holdings, but is absent from the public photographic archives used for press distribution. The physical print carries an office stamp. Received, Admin, Office, 11/08/1924 4:22 p.m. The stamp timestamp does not match the production log entries for that photograph's processing. The timeline repeats a missing hour. A draft contract dated 11/08/1924 predates public records. The same signature appears in pencil and ink. Camera logs record repositioning at 10:10 a.m. A photograph documents 10:17 a.m. on the corridor. Production, receptionist, and stage logs contain overlapping, inconsistent timestamps. Multiple documents were edited and replaced within hours of the meeting. The pattern left no space to hide. One item, mentioned earlier only in passing, sits at the center of the shift, the administrative office stamp on the corridor photograph. The stamp reads, "Received, Admin, Office, 11/08/1924 4:22 p.m. The ink is dark, consistent, and matches other stamps from the same day. But a second copy of the photograph, stored in the studio's general archive, carries a different stamp. Logged Photo Department, 11/07/1924 5:10 p.m. This earlier date predates the meeting, the contract draft, and the camera repositioning. The two prints are identical in framing, subject placement, and visible details. Both show Chaplin and Gray in the second-floor corridor. Both contain the same crease in the negative. Only the dates differ. No explanation accompanies the earlier stamp. No record lists a photograph taken on 11/07/1924 of that corridor. The mismatch leads directly to a set of details that are difficult to reconcile with the official timeline. First, a camera maintenance log notes that the same corridor camera responsible for that photograph was checked on 11/07/1924 at 3:40 p.m. with a line reading, "Test shot OK." No corresponding test shot exists in the standard archives. Second, a hallway visitor log for 11/07/1924 includes an entry labeled only CC Private. The entry is written in the same blue ink as the later private meeting note on 11/08, but the handwriting angle differs slightly, suggesting a second writer using similar notation. Third, a supply invoice for photographic paper dated 11/07/1924 lists 2 additional prints for admin use, though only one print from that roll appears in the typical inventory. The invoice references an internal request form that no longer exists in storage. Fourth, 2 staff interviews recorded separately each contain the same phrase when asked about the corridor. It wasn't the first time. The wording appears in both transcripts without prompting, though neither interview connects it to a specific date. Finally, the press draft removed from the November 12 release mentions studio discussions occurring earlier than scheduled, a line that was deleted before distribution. Together, these pieces connect the earlier stamp to the concealed timeline, not by intent, but by a chain of records that never fully aligned. The decisive reveal comes from the camera negative log, stored in a separate cabinet from the print archives. The log lists each frame by roll number. For the corridor photograph, it records Frame 12, 11/07/1924, Chaplin Gray Corridor Test. The negative's timestamp predates every public claim about when Chaplin and Gray were first seen together at the studio in a private capacity. The meeting on 11/08 was not the beginning. It was a continuation of an earlier, undocumented interaction. No corrections appear next to the entry. No later edits attempt to modify the date. The log has one simple notation beneath it, written in pencil: keep separate. Nothing else links to that instruction. The record never lost the trail.